waiting and applying for a refinancing of my mortgage. I keep getting hassles. Okay, today we are going to do communication. The other class, there's a class right before you, and they asked that I extend the due date for the social media, social dilemma discussion board for a day. So I said, okay, so, if you need some extra time, you can do it today. Are there any questions about the discussion board at this point? Or anything else? Okay, if there are, feel free to interrupt. Today we are going to discuss communication. Before I do that, maybe I should just go over the syllabus briefly as to what we need to do for the coming few weeks. Let's see. So basically, we're coming down to the wire here. There's only 3 more discussion boards after this one, and we're going to do communication this week and leadership on Monday, and then the college is closed for spring break on the 5th and the 10th. I'm going to New Orleans that week, and hopefully have a good time. And then we're going to come back and discuss power and politics. I assigned Moneyball. I'll be interested in your reaction to it, which is really about HR. It's really an HR movie, but it also has a lot to do with power and politics organizationally.
Yeah.
How can they get through it?
It was like,
And
yep.
Monday, April 17th.
Have a designated driver when we go out at night and drink. Like the train literally pulls up right at our crib. So no point.
I have to fix this. Middle. It's not needed. Okay. So basically, we're making a lot of progress here. We're on schedule, and I guess there's not really a huge amount coming up in the next couple of weeks, so you have some downtime. And we're going to have the break. We'll do the fog of war discussion board is due on the 19th, and the social dilemma one is due tomorrow night. The discussion board on Moneyball is due on the 12th. And I think that'll be it. So we've got a few more things to do, and then I'll be able to give out the exam towards the end of the semester, and that'll be it for the semester. So we've made a lot of progress. It's amazing how time flies. All right, so I'll start with attendance, and then we'll get into a discussion of communication. And I think, like, communication, your book's kind of theoretical and technical, and it emphasizes the interaction of technology with communication, which is legitimate. I mean, that's an important aspect of it. But it's also true that you have to think a lot about how to manage your own communication. When I teach 3200, I give I use a skills approach, and I think you should think about that as well. How do I communicate in a way that is beneficial to me and that furthers my business career? And part of that is the accuracy of communication, which we'll discuss. And part of it is the emotional content of communication. So basically, all communication has two levels that occur simultaneously. There's the information and there's the emotion. And the information and emotion may not be linked. So in other words, there are a lot of things that you can communicate that will be emotionally neutral, and you can make them into things that are satisfying to the other party, or make them into things that are dissatisfying to the other party. And so it's up to you to learn to structure your communication so that you win people over. And I think that's the most important point about communication, is that it's crucial to relationship building. It's crucial to winning over customers. It's crucial to your relationship with your management if you're in a company. And the emotional part is as important as the informational part. And the trend has been, social media, but also not just social media, but all the technology that we've found beneficial in the last 20 years, including the internet and the personal computer and smartphones and texting and everything else, including social media, is stuff that improves the accuracy and the speed of communication, but doesn't help and may hinder the emotional aspects of communication. And I might add, has dubious benefits when it comes to the cognitive aspects of communication, meaning like how much mental improvement, how much smarter are you because of your cell phone? I'll talk a little bit more about that. So basically, I think there's a lot of issues with communication right now, and this has come to the fore. I was just reading in the newspaper today that a number of our elected politicians are talking about illegalizing TikTok because of the communist influence, Chinese communist influence on the management. Now, I don't personally believe that it's legal to ban a communication platform. I don't think it's constitutional. The First Amendment is pretty clear that we have freedom of speech, and that includes freedom to communicate on TikTok. I don't really agree that, and even if you find a way, you could say, well, there's an imminent threat. But I mean, you can make an argument if there's an imminent threat to speech. So, the traditional one is shouting fire in a crowded theater. That does not mean that you disagree with someone on social media, that they're shouting fire. I've had people say to me, oh, you can't say that. That's like shouting fire in a crowded theater. It's not like shouting fire in a crowded theater. Social media is not a theater, and it's not crowded. You're at home alone. It's like nothing in common with it. So basically, this kind of rationale for prohibiting speech comes from an imminent danger. I mean, if there's some kind of imminent threat from speech, or the speech is in some way deceptive enough to cause financial loss that's immediate, cause some kind of crime stealing or killing that would take effect immediately, then there's rationale for banning the speech. So, committing fraud is wrong, or inciting to riot is wrong. But these things can easily become pretextual and become an excuse simply to ban speech that you disagree with, and that's a dangerous thing. Then you're beginning to, instead of resisting communism, you're becoming like the communists. That's what they do. You're doing what they do. You become like them when you do that. So you don't want to ban TikTok. But that said, people are proposing it, and I think part of the reason is that we've reached the social media doesn't necessarily enhance our intellectual sophistication, and this is unfortunate, but I think it's true. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I'll take attendance, and we could maybe discuss the social dilemma for a minute. Farhad, Abdul, Farhad, Ahmed Alkor, Mohammed Afi, where's everybody? Is the sound, you're saying the sound is fuzzy? Is it still fuzzy?
Yeah, good morning, Professor. The sound's still fuzzy.
It's fuzzy. All right, let me try to. Let's see if I can, I'm gonna unplug this for a second and then see if it. The sound, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Much better for me. Much better for me.
Better?
Better.
It's better, okay, because it got a little loose or something. All right, thanks for telling me that. So I'll restart the video. And if there's a problem, let me know. Okay, so oh yeah, I was taking attendance. Sorry, maybe people didn't hear it. I'll start from the beginning. Abdul, Farhad, Ahmed Alkor.
Sorry, I'm here.
This is Farhad.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Ahmed Alkor, Mohammed Afi, Jenna Bell,
I'm here.
Joseph Catanzaro,
I'm here, Professor.
okay, Jiamin Chen,
I'm here.
Janine Cola, Kermia Cyrus,
I'm here, Professor.
okay. David Estorovsky,
I'm here, Professor.
okay. Marimar Garcia, Monica, Alexia,
Here.
well, Kani Jiang,
Here.
well, Yusuf Khan, Georgie Karimlashvili,
I'm here.
hello. Summer, Hung Jian Lin,
Here.
hello. Hamdi Mali,
Here.
hello. Ludley Noel,
I'm here.
hello. Bamida Patwari.
Here.
Hello.
Hello.
Emmanuel Plamakis.
Here.
Hello. Raquel Porteous.
Here, Professor. Good morning.
Morning. Jishan Ruan.
I'm here.
Hello. Brendan.
Hello, Professor. Morning.
Hi, Brendan. Aaliyah.
Good morning, Professor. I'm here.
Aaliyah. Stacy Ergiles.
Good morning. I'm here.
Okay, hello. Denasia. Jack Wu.
Here.
Jack Wu. Okay. Yayin.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Yixuan.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Matthew Zhao.
Here, Professor.
Hello. Taryn.
Hi, here.
Hello. Christian Mendez.
Good morning, Professor. I'm here.
Good morning. Jemaya.
Here.
Janaya, I'm sorry, Janaya. Alexander. Alexander. And Jack Shrem.
Here, Professor.
Hello. I'm going to call the names that I didn't call, that didn't answer the first time. Okay, Alexander Betts is here. I got it. Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the people who didn't answer the first time. If you're here, let me know. Ahmed Alcor. Mohammed Afi.
Here.
Okay. Janine Cola. Marimar Garcia. Monica Garcia. Yusuf Kahan.
I'm here, Professor.
Yusuf, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Summer Lamb. Denasia Warner. Okay, that's it for attendance. Okay. All right. So you're as I before I talk about the chapter, who has something to say about any thoughts on the movie The Social Media? Anything, any insights, Emmanuel?
You mean the social dilemma?
So I'm sorry, The Social Dilemma. Yeah, my mistake.
Honestly, I was gonna watch it tonight, but I've seen it before, and it goes into social media, so I can get back to you on that one.
Okay, all right. You have to refresh your memory. Anyone else? Brendan?
I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't watch it yet. I didn't start to
Okay, all right.
yeah.
Let's try to get to it today. So
Yeah.
it's an important movie. I think if you haven't seen it, you really should watch it. Although it's a couple of years old now, and some things have already changed. It shows how fast the technology changes. My wife is into consulting and training programs, and she's setting up a website, and she was telling me that the AI now can design a video presentation. You can just tell it to design some kind of training program or video presentation, and then there's other AI that can put the video, the actual visual components together to go with the language. So basically, you don't need to do anything. I'm not saying she does that, but that's now available. What's also available and is probably going to eventually be integrated into stuff like Blackboard is that there are now programs that are able to detect whether you use ChatGPT or another AI thing to answer, to write. In other words, it can tell whether. Okay, Raquel, do you have a question? Point.
No, not a question, Professor. I did watch the Social Dilemma.
All right, okay, so what'd you think?
I think it just shows you that we're all in this well architect game, if you call it that, because everything that we do is monitored and used for everything that we do is monitored and in turn used to target us to either increase sales or to keep us on certain websites, to track our behavior and basically just keep us connected to the web ongoingly, which in turns is destructive. And the movie really shows you that these companies with these different platforms know what they're doing, and the codes that they write are set in such a way that keeps us connected, even though they know there are unhealthy factors to it. Like that's kind of the summary that I
Yeah,
got
that's
from
great.
it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's excellent. I agree with everything you said. There's a um a proposal now. It's not really a proposal, but there's talk about the US adopting a central bank digital currency. And what that would mean is that they would do away with the banks. The banks would all be eliminated, and credit card companies. You would have an account with the Federal Reserve Bank, and all your spending would be through this account. So you would get, it would be like paying with your smartphone, as a lot of you probably do now, but instead of it going to a credit card company or Google or whatever, it goes to the Fed. And so all money would be based in the Fed. There would be no more banks. So you wouldn't need a bank account. You would just put your money into the Fed. This has been done in China, and it's, to me, the ultimate culmination of social media. And the reason is that all of these technologies are linked to social control, which the idea of social control goes back more than a century, and it began to develop rapidly during World War I with the use of propaganda, the invention of political propaganda on a large scale. I mean, political propaganda always existed, going back to ancient times, probably in the times of the pharaohs, certainly in the times of the Romans, it was around, and it always existed, but it's gonna take on new potency with technology. And so, I was just talking about this in the other class. In the 1930s, this famous entertainer and movie maker named Orson Welles got the idea. He had a radio program that this was before television, and he got the idea to do a radio broadcast as though Martians had landed and were taking over New York, or I think it was New York, and people actually believed it was real. So what he established, I don't think he did this intentionally, although I don't know, is that people will believe pretty much anything if they're told it. So, he's broadcasting that the Martians are landing and we're fighting and only a few of us are left. And, people in their homes are like listening to this and they actually believe that the Martians are landing. And sure. And basically, what that showed is like people are going to believe almost anything they're told. Especially if it comes from an electronic source, that for some reason they think it has credibility because it comes from the TV or radio, or now with TikTok and these other ones. I was on Facebook for a while. I got off it because I felt the emotional manipulation and stress and disjointedness that I was experiencing. I haven't used it in years, but basically, what he showed is that people will believe things easily, especially if they're told to them by the TV. And so this greatly extends the scope of social control and the rapidity with which you can control people. We don't know, nobody knows to what degree the news on TV is modified by intentional efforts at social control. I have little doubt that it's extensive. I'm not saying it's necessarily directly done by government agencies, although some of it I have no doubt is, but it's also done by the media people themselves who also the media is not a neutral actor. We all have our biases. I do. I work for CUNY. I have my viewpoints. We all have biases, and the media is certainly not an exception. Are not an exception. So, there's ongoing attempt to influence, which is part of why I tell them when I assign a research project, I tell my classes not to use Google because it's biased and it's not useful as a foundational source. It's useful to retrieve factual data. So if you know what what your conclusions are already, and you're looking for information, that's fine. But if you don't know anything about a topic, using Google for your basic information is ridiculous. And ChatGPT is worse. These are highly biased sources that select information that reflects the opinions of some tech guy somewhere that you don't really know who they are, and often are uninformed. And so you can't rely on these things for your basic information. So basically, I think social media has in many ways improved the amount of information and facilitates business communication, which I'll talk about, and that's really important. But it hasn't done much for the emotional content of information, and it's done even less for what I might call the cognitive, or how you structure knowledge. I don't think it's done much for that either. I don't think people are smarter because they have social media. I think the reverse, that it's actually slowed people down. And I think as well, it could have been that the colleges taught people like how to resist, like the Orson Welles syndrome, where they believe that Martians are landing. But I don't think the colleges have done that. I started to realize this about 15 years ago. I got the idea to teach. At that time, there was a series of popular films about business that gave very, very biased viewpoints. And my idea was to have the students read about the company, then watch the film, and then evaluate the film. And I taught at that time the 4200W class, the writing intensive class, and I did that as a senior seminar. And what I was finding was that the students would watch the movie and then believe what the movie said, rather than think critically about it. And they didn't read the material I gave them. So basically, there was a tendency to simply believe what they're told. And this is the exact reverse of what school should be teaching you. So I would say that higher education has largely been a failure. I do it, I make my living, but that's the conclusion I've drawn through the years, that it doesn't do a good job. Higher education doesn't do what it's called. It says it's education, but education means you become more skeptical, not more gullible. That has been reinforced recently because, well, I think reinforced is the wrong word, but underscored because I was on. I logged on to MSN a few days ago, and there was this big article which I forwarded to my colleagues that the government bureaucrats are increasingly, and this goes for both parties, it's not just one party, are increasingly deciding not to require college degrees in staffing government jobs, so that college degrees are being rolled back as credentials. I'm sorry to tell you this, it doesn't make me happy that this is the case, but this was right. This was in MSN. It wasn't in some fringe thing or some post on Facebook or something. It was like MSN. So basically, which is very establishment. I'm not saying they're not biased either. They are. I don't believe what they say, but in other words, they're in the camp that would favor these requirements, and they're talking about that they're being rolled back by both parties. So basically, the thing, some of the things we need to ask ourselves when we communicate with people are, what are they really saying? Do I understand them? And do I believe them? And this is something that's often hard to decide. Somebody says to me that a stock is going to go up, and they've done a lot of research, and I've done much less research than they have. I still have to decide whether they're right or not. And someone could have done a huge amount of research on a stock and be convinced that it's going to go up, but be wrong. That's quite possible too. So just because they're more knowledgeable than you doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. So basically, getting into the issue about communication, I think there's little doubt that communication has improved across many professions. So surgeons say that they communicate better. If you define communication as the transfer and understanding of meaning, all the technology I'm talking about does improve communication greatly. But it doesn't replace, the technology doesn't replace the basic human interaction that's required when you communicate face to face. And the reason for that is information richness. The idea of information richness is that different modes of communication communicate different amounts of information. And the amount of information communicated in a given episode of communication is the richness. So basically, for a long time, I taught online classes that were asynchronous. Asynchronous communication means that the messages sent and received don't require that the sender and receiver are physically present or psychologically present during the communication exchange. So for example, discussion boards, email, voicemail, these are asynchronous methods. Whereas synchronous methods means that the sender and receiver are present together and focused on the communication exchange. Clearly, synchronous communication is richer than asynchronous. It's richer to talk on Zoom than to do a discussion board and never meet. And I taught the asynchronous method for many years, and it worked okay, but this is better, of course. Now, of course, this is less rich than face-to-face communication. And we'll talk about the reasons, but I mean, part of it is that you're not everyone is even at the computer part of the time or much of the time. So basically, how could there be communication if you're not even present? So it facilitates this kind of, economists would call it kind of shirking, that you don't participate. You let other people participate. And This, of course, means that the communication is less rich and you get less out of it. And so it leads to less performance. A big part of communication is listening. And I can't emphasize that enough. Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. That, in other words, you want to hear what other people are saying before you tell them what you think. And this is very good business advice, because you can't really understand a customer without understanding what they want. And so ideally, we will learn from them what it is they think, and then try to tailor our sales pitch or our message or our framing of our product to their belief system. But most of us are bad listeners, and we often experience listener burnout. So our minds wander. And the reason is that our minds work more quickly than people talk. So it's easy to lose interest, and then our minds wander, and then we're not paying attention because we're thinking about something else. The simple truth is that face-to-face communication is far more powerful. It influences transactive memory systems, and it's critical to effective communication to have this kind of interaction. Electronic communication doesn't allow that. So we lose a lot of the richness that comes from face-to-face communication. Now, if you look historically at why organizations exist at all, why do organizations exist at all? It was because before there was technology, you could communicate rapidly using a chain. So a chain, of course, just meaning that, you know, you're playing a game of telephone. And so oh God, I'll never get this right. Okay. So you have a few people and you're communicating. I'll never get that. Let me just clear that. You're communicating from one person to the other, you know, so if each of these has somebody who's receiving the communication, or that doesn't work either. So each person, you know, this X's are the people, and you're communicating in a chain. And what the reason that's effective, if you look at you know, the Roman army in ancient times, and the year 0 or the, you know, 500 BC or whatever, the way they set it up was they had 10 reports. So you had the capo, or the head, and the head had 10 reports. And you know, so they had 10 reports. You know, and so on. So I'm not very good at this. So they each had a bunch of reports. They each had 10 reports. So if you have 10 reports, then 4 levels will give you 10,000 people. 4 to the 10, 10 to the 4th, I mean, 10 to the 4th, 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 is 10,000. And so with 4 levels, you can talk to 4 people. You can talk, I'm sorry, to 10 people, and go through that iteration 4 times, and you can reach 10,000 people. So what that does is it facilitates communication greatly. And so organizations of that type, including most major corporations until now, are set up with these hierarchies so that you can have a telephone effect, that now, if you ever played the game of telephone when you were a little kid, you know that if you have 15 people and one says something to one person who then says it, and you go across the 15 people, by the time it comes to the last person, the message is going to be distorted. And that's true even with 4 people. So when I worked for J&J, it would happen all the time that, the head of the whole area, John Heldrich, would make some comment that he wanted something, and this would get relayed down. And by the time it came to us, it was totally blown out of proportion or different in some way. And this is characteristic of chains of command. Now, what the technology facilitated is that, so getting back to this, is that instead of having a chain, you have more of a, I don't know what you would call this, a center, a network with a center, and one person, you see this in 2 dimensions, it's flat, but the middle one could be elevated, so they're on a higher level and speaking to everybody at one shot. And that's exactly what email and texting allows you to do. So you can cut down on the organizational levels, and that reduces the amount of communication, the amount of miscommunication, okay, the amount of communication necessary. Now, unfortunately, as I say, most of us are bad listeners, and we frequently experience listener burnout because our minds wander. And so that's why it's very good if we intersperse our electronic communication with face-to-face, so because we're more likely to get a full sense of the other person and their opinions when we talk face-to-face. Now, of course, face-to-face communication doesn't solve the problem of not paying attention or not communicating, not listening. All right, so basically, a technique that's useful is the idea of active listening, which is that we actively engage and then respond with the other party. So active listening improves our communication. One way to do this is through reflective responses. The idea of reflective responses is that when somebody says something, we find a good time to let them know we're listening. We say, oh, is that so? Oh, good point, or something along those lines. So we encourage the other person to talk. Reflective listening means that we're acknowledging someone else, but we're letting them talk. Deflective reasoning is where we deflect what the other person is saying and we change it so that the focus is on us. So someone's talking about their own problem and we say, oh, I agree. This is what happened to me. And then you change the topic to your problem. And that's going to be less supportive of the other person. So basically, we need to learn listening techniques and learn to discipline ourselves to listening. If you look at successful people, they're almost always very good listeners. They understand the customer. This was, if you watch that movie, I watched the other day. It's a little older than I thought. It was made in 2012. Inventing David Geffen, about the rock manager and promoter David Geffen, who established several record labels and was bought out by Atlantic Records and is now the richest person in Hollywood now. And the way he's number 93 on the Forbes 400. And the way he became so successful was largely that he understood the rock musicians. So when he started out, rock music was exploding, and this was around the late 60s or 70. And he was the same age as the musicians. He hung out with them, became their friends, and understood what their concerns were. He listened to them, in effect. And so he was able to win them over. And the same is true if you look at James Goodnight, the CEO of SAS. In my HR class, we do a case study of SAS. And SAS is a computer and statistical company. They sell statistical software and analytical software to major corporations, and it started out selling it to higher academia. I've used it all my life. Goodnight is also in the Forbes 400. He's number 104, a little bit behind Geffen. And he's also, just like Geffen, made his career being supportive of the mathematicians and statisticians and market research people and analysts that work for him. So, what he says is that his most valuable assets drive out of the parking lot every day, and his job is to make sure that they come back the next day. And so basically he sets up a whole system of listening to the customer. So in other words, he listens to the employees and make sure they're happy, and SAS listens to the customers, and because of their focused strategy, is able to devise software that reflects the needs of their customers. And that's why they're able to keep these highly sophisticated customers. Their customers will usually have at least master's degrees, if not PhDs. And so their customers rely on their software to do the kinds of analysis that are necessary to satisfy competitive markets. And the way that you do that is by understanding what their needs are. So listening is highly, highly important. Now, we all work heavily with electronic media, and it's important to understand how it affects all of this, how it affects our listening, how it affects our knowledge base, how it affects our ability to get along with people. And there are, of course, significant effects of electronic media on us. So basically, something like 60% spend at least an hour a day, 60% of employees, and 22% spend up to 2 hours a day on email and messaging. So it has both positive and negative effects. Email adds to a sense of both pressure and accomplishment. People who clear out their emails feel like they've accomplished something. But it can also give people a sense of being boxed in, that they have to take care of the email first. I would say that most people suffer from information overload, and so they get too many emails. And so one of the things I do when I get all kinds of emails from crazy advertising emails and all this kind of thing, I simply delete them without looking at them. And so I've noticed a tendency for emails to disappear into the void. So in other words, I have an email, I intend to respond to it, and then it disappears. And the reason that happens, I'm sure, is that I accidentally delete it along with all the garbage. So basically, my sense of email is that it's necessary, it's good to communicate that way. If there's something that's extremely important to you, such as like trying to get a job, I would not rely just on email. I don't think it gets the attention that other techniques do. And the reason, again, if you look at the scale of information richness, emails are not that rich a communication device. There's not that much information communicated in a given information episode. And so there's not a lot of involvement. Some ways to handle email are to assign times, to turn off notifications, to erase mail that you don't need anymore because you've read it, to archive email and categorize folders so it's easy to access. And I don't do that, which is why I have that problem. And to think before you send it. I have a tendency to overreact and then send an emotional email, and that will get you into big trouble. All right, so basically, you want to assign time to email. A very big problem with the social media, which I think is true of cell phones in general. It's not just social media. I think it's also true of instant messaging and more so of texting. The texting, you get a text and your thing bings and you feel a need to pay attention to it. And I see this in my live classes. Many times I call in a student on Zoom and they're not at the cam. So, I mean, I don't know what that implies, but I think it implies that at least some people are not, listening. And then if you are live, what I see a lot of students doing is they're sitting in the class and they get on their smartphones. And so they're texting. So the smartphones, it's as though they're an appendage of their smartphone, that they're unable to put it down. And they need to function in terms of the smartphone instead of thinking for themselves and turning the smartphone off when they're in a setting where use of a smartphone is inappropriate. And of course, I tolerate it because it's part of school to try to create a positive environment. But if you develop that kind of habit and you go into a business meeting and you're talking in a meeting and you're texting while you're talking, I don't think you're going to make a very good impression. I may be wrong. It may be that our society as a whole is transformed and like people are completely disjointed now and incapable of linear thought. And so everybody's on a cell phone and nobody knows the difference. It could be. But in that case, what I anticipate is significant cognitive breakdowns. That, in other words, there's going to be more and more disorientation. Things will be harder to get done. It'll be harder. You go to a lawyer and you expect the result, and the lawyers, instead of talking to you, they're on their cell phone looking at the texting from some clown elsewhere. And so the result is that they don't understand what your legal problem is. And if it's getting to that level, then there's going to be increasing social breakdown, which isn't to say that I disapprove, not to approve or disapprove, but I favor banning anything, banning TikTok or banning something that politicians say stuff like that. I think that's fundamentally incorrect, and it's the wrong mental model to have. That, in other words, if TikTok is wrong, you train people to how to think rationally so they don't use these kinds of technologies, or they're not dependent on it. I know a lot of you do. I don't mean to criticize. But basically, if there's something wrong with it, you should be able to make a rational argument. But as I say, I think increasingly there's a lack of rationality because of what you might call the Orson Welles effect. That, in other words, if you're exposed to media, people start to believe it unreflectively. And so just like in the 1930s, Americans believed that we were being invaded by Martians. Today, people believe everything they're told on TikTok, or they believe what even in my generation, people believe what they're told on the television, and that's equally absurd. It's not that TV is any better than TikTok. It's just another vehicle that you need to examine and question. And I think part of the reason civilization advanced in the days of Descartes, who lived in the 16th century, was that people began to question what is true and what isn't true. And the more that they feel the need to do so, the more questions they ask, the more they're going to come up with new ideas and new solutions. And that's where you started to have innovation and technological advance, and people started to have a mind of questioning and skepticism. I think they're related. But what electronic media does is it creates a mass mind that's like kind of like a crowd mentality, that you're triggered. And this is again related to neuro-linguistic programming, that people react to certain kinds of cues, and your unconscious reacts automatically to certain cues. So people who study neuro-linguistic programming use techniques like matching breathing rate to the person they're talking to, or matching facial expression. And they find that if you match your communication style, you can then influence the person, or use certain kinds of words, or use certain kinds of cues. And what your friends in this movie say is that they have so much information about how people react to the cues that they send, that this electronic, I don't know if you call it neuro-linguistic programming or something related to it, but the programming that they do is based on massive data sets where they can very reliably predict how people are going to react to the cues they give. So as manipulative, and I have no doubt of this, that the magazines of the 1910s were manipulative, and the newspapers of the 20th century were manipulative, and the television of the 1960s into today was manipulative, has been manipulative, that the social media is even more manipulative. And so they're able to adjust it to fine tune the effects of the social media. So basically what the schools should be doing is teaching you how to be more skeptical. And instead what they do is they teach you how to believe. So basically you're taught to believe a certain narrative based on the political opinions of the people running the college. And the students then repeat the narrative, and they don't look for evidence objectively. And so basically this habit of reflectively believing authorities, I've had students say this to me this semester, oh, the experts say it, so it must be true. So this habit of mine leads, of course, to gullibility, which in turn leads to an inability to resist the cues given to you by social media. So basically, studies find that there's a greater willingness to lie on our own parts when we use social media, when we use email, I mean, and also people tend to be more rude than they will be in person. Usually it's a good idea to turn email, and I would say other forms of electronic media, off and only use it at certain times. If you're so addicted to it that you can't turn it off ever, I would say start to work on that. You've got a problem, and work on it. Turn off notifications. Don't let the thing ding, especially if you're susceptible to it. Erase email that you've read. Use search functionality to find emails and archive emails that you've already read, which I don't do, as I said. So basically, if you want to be really creative, you have to commit time to something, and you have to commit focus. You know, if you look at the story of Jackson Pollock, Peggy Guggenheim funded him to spend his entire day working on art. And so he was able to concentrate completely on his art. This in turn led to his innovation of the splatter painting. And you could say, I think I showed it, I forget if I showed it to you, I think I did, but basically, you know, a lot of people would say, it's not really art, or it's, it's crap. And I don't disagree with you. But the thing is, art is what sells. I mean, and the simple truth is, let's see if I can get a good picture of this. They're not letting me. I hate this. So there it goes. It just rang. So basically, this is one of his paintings, and you might say, oh, anyone in the child could do it. It's really nothing. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but the fact is that he sold one of his paintings recently, sold for $200 million, and number 5 sold for $140 million a number of years ago. And so basically, I mean, art is what people say is art. I can't really debate that. So basically, and the same is true. I mean, if you want to understand a customer, how are you going to really understand them? You're not going to understand them. That thing dings and you run and answer it. You're never going to have that breakthrough insight. The way you have the breakthrough insight is by concentrating. The way you concentrate is by getting rid of the social media. So basically, if you allow yourself to be controlled, if you become a tool of the social media and you're not able to listen for an hour and a half, I'm not saying it's easy. I have trouble listening too. But if you're not even able to try, you got to ask yourself, where is this leading me to? Will I ever be Jackson Pollock? I'm not saying most of us will, but everything's, in your life, how will you become your version of Jackson Pollock? And so basically, we've got to think about this very carefully. So, the reason face-to-face communication is so much more valuable than online communication or texting or emails is that the vocal intonation and body language, i.e. nonverbal communication, plays a huge role in face-to-face communication. Body language is that our posture sends a message. Touch can send a message. Even smell can send a message. How we say something is as important as what we say. Contact and handshaking will influence our feelings towards someone. And, the message in the COVID period, not to shake hands, I mean, this has ramifications for human interaction. And it's probably why, like, there were a lot of negative repercussions, suicide rates and such things. So basically, nonverbal communication plays a huge role in how we communicate. And if we work in close proximity to somebody, we can form and maintain relationships which lead to the likelihood that we're going to start new ventures, come up with new ideas. And this has a lot to do with creativity too. So the isolation that electronic media, and I think things like Chat GPT lead to, can be counterproductive, without a doubt. So basically, we need to choose the right communication methods. In-person meetings are appropriate when you need to resolve a conflict because you need that nonverbal communication. When you want to discuss goals, when there are emotional issues of any kind, when you want to discuss long-term planning or expectations, when there's a need for back and forth, when there's a need for sharing, when there's a need for gauging receptivity. All these are reasons why you want to have in-person meetings, and in-person meetings remain the most potent form of communication for business purposes. And someone who avoids such communication is going to be at a significant disadvantage. Phone calls are appropriate when you need something done quickly, when you need some back and forth. Impressions need to be managed, so just writing something down won't help. Texts are appropriate when you need to share a thought quickly. You have a quick, non-critical question, something brief. When you need to make a point to multiple people at once, or to request an in-person meeting, but they're not at all appropriate for something of any importance. So anything emotional or complicated or long-term, that's not done by text. Okay, phone calls are good for medium tasks where you need some verbal explanation, but it's not highly charged, where it's not emotional, where you need to manage impressions to a degree, but there not a lot of depth is required. Texts are much less rich vehicles, and so you don't want to use them where there's any kind of emotional content. The same is true for email, but if you have something more detailed than a text, or you need to send formal documentation, attachments, email without attachments is like, fish out of water. I never understand that, they have these like secure email things and you're not allowed to make attachments. Attachments are why you're sending an email. So basically, if you're sharing formal documentation, if you have some official statement, if you are outlining procedures or giving details, then text is good. Now, I'm sorry, then email is good. Now, it's very important to remember, and I can't emphasize this enough, that you should always be aware that email is going to be susceptible to being repeated. So basically, once you send something by email, you might assume that it becomes public record. All right. So back when newspapers were big, people used to say, don't say anything that you don't want to see on the front page of the newspaper. Okay, now I would say, don't send anything by email that you don't want to see on the front page of a newspaper. And the same is true, of course, with social media. For most of us, it doesn't matter that much. But I assure you, if you're looking for a job, anything on social media is going to be inspected. So basically, if you put something untoward on an account that bears your name, it's very possible that a prospective employer that you want to work for is going to see it and not hire you. So you have to be extremely careful about that. Okay, I talked about richness. Some of the barriers to communication include information overload, that we get so much of this electronic information that we only absorb a portion of it. Communication apprehension. We often feel nervous or tense about communicating with others, and this can affect how we communicate. In a crisis, we're often worried about sharing information, but it is often helpful to do so. So basically, one of the things about crises is that people tend to become more rigid. And we saw this in COVID in spades. So basically, the reaction to COVID was to centralize control, to tighten control, to get more control over people. And all the governments did this. It was done here. It was even worse in China, which just released the rules recently. And it was done in Europe, etc. And so the idea is like you tighten control, just believe the centralized authority. Other people's opinions can't be believed, and so on. And this kind of authoritarian obsession with control is characteristic of threat rigidity responses that are common in crises. And actually, what you want to do is the exact reverse. So basically, the handling of COVID by the world's governments was pretty much, I think, textbook bad management. And so basically what they should have done was encourage debate, encourage openness, encourage new ideas, encourage discussion, and come up with solutions that compete with each other and that whose results we can compare. And this wasn't done, and it's often not done. So firms need to do that too. So in other words, if you have a dangerous bankruptcy looming in your firm and you have a crisis, you need to come up with a lot of ideas. And instead of centralizing authority, what you should do is download authority and let your employees come up with concepts that the company might benefit from. All right, so basically, you can compare the richness of the different channels of communication, and ranking them, the best is conversations, the worst would be memos and email. Telephone conversations are somewhat better. Zoom is better than telephone because there's some visual, but most of you guys don't disagree with that. And in person is by far the best. People for a long time, for like 10 years, were fooling around with blogging, and it worked to a degree. It was a great expansion of points of view and more information, but it's given way in the last few years to vlogging, vlogging, video logging, or podcasts. And so people no longer read, they more look for the video. And I think this is going to change education radically. So we'll talk about that next time. We're running out of time. And so for next time, we'll continue with communication. And the time after that, we'll do leadership, I guess. And then we're going on break. And the break starts on the 5th. And then, you know, we've got lots of material to do, but only a few weeks left. So have a good day. And if you want to talk to me, as someone, I think it was Raquel, said she wanted to talk to me. Anyone else who wants to, please stick around. Otherwise, have a nice day.
Hi, Professor. I think my audio wasn't working for Monica Garcia.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
See you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Anyone else have a question? Raquel, do you want to talk?
Yeah,
Professor, I have a
Professor,
question.
Oh,
I'm
wait,
waiting
is
until everyone comes up.
Okay. Mohammed, was it Mohammed who had a question?
Yeah. So basically, like I thought I submitted the discussion board for the one that was due on the 20th, but apparently I did not because I write it on my notes and then I go ahead and I paste it onto Blackboard. So I had submitted it yesterday. I don't know if you were able to see it.
Okay, I'll give you credit for it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Yusuf, did you have a question? Farhad, Jenna? Raquel, do you want to talk?